Broadcasting from our flagship station, KNYE, in Pahrump, Nevada, and worldwide on the internet, this is Midnight in the Desert. I am your guest host, Tim Weisburg. Whether it's the brightest of day or the darkest of night, wherever you may be, it's time to hunker down for the next 3 hours as we enter into a world of wonder and weird that you won't hear anywhere else. And I'm glad to be with you, Tim Weisburg here, filling in for Dave Schrader. And I really enjoy the chance to talk with you, especially as the week is winding up. We get so wrapped up in our everyday lives that we don't really have the opportunity to sit back and ponder some of life's bigger mysteries, some of the things that are out there that we don't really understand, some of the things that maybe we aren't supposed to understand, but we can still kind of hack our way into the truth. And that's something that we're going to be talking about tonight with a pair of guests. We'll be talking with Marilynn Hughes. We'll be talking about ghosts. We're talking about out-of-body experiences. We'll be talking about astral travel. We'll be talking about hauntings, poltergeists, all that good stuff. And then later on in the program, we'll also be talking with somebody who I had the chance to speak with earlier. And one of the great things about doing this show is that we'll be able to talk to guests like Louis Proud, who is on the other side of the world, but yet we'll still be able to join us. We seem to, I don't know what it is, but as much as we spread around the world, us as human beings, we seem to stay connected with one another. We seem to still have the ability to reach out to people anywhere in the world and still feel like we're in the same room with them. And I'm not talking about the technology. I'm not talking about having the chance to connect via Skype or even regular telephone or through messaging or texting. I'm talking about the fact that we
Hello.
get to... Hi, Marilynn. How you doing? And
Good. How are you?
I was just talking about the fact that we are all kind of connected beyond just being able to speak to one another, that we have some sort of a thread that combines all of us as people. Whether we believe in some of this stuff, whether we believe in the fact that there is that connection, it doesn't matter. It's still there and it still runs through all of us. So we're going to start talking about that and more with Marilynn Hughes. She had a long-standing career in broadcasting as a news anchor, reporter, and producer. She's experienced, researched, written, and taught about out-of-body travel and mysticism since 1987, and she has written more than 50 out-of-body travel books. So my first question for you, Marilynn, is when you have written more than 50 out-of-body travel books, does that mean 50 books about traveling out of your body, or you were out of your body when you wrote 50 books? Because either way, it's impressive.
Yeah, they were definitely about out-of-body traveling. Yes, they were about out-of-body traveling, yes. Written a lot of books. I've done a lot of them on the experiences I've had myself, as well as a whole series of books on, things that help people to learn how to have the experiences themselves. And there's another series of books as well that's on the world religions and out-of-body travel and experiences. So there's a lot of variation there.
I go into the AAA office locally here quite a bit to get all my discounts and member perks, and I don't think out-of-body travel is something that they've ever really tried to pitch to me as one of the options. There's air travel, there's rail travel, but out-of-body travel is something that is fascinating to me because there's so many places that I want to see in the world, and so many people that I want to be able to visit with, but I just don't always have that opportunity because of my schedule. And what I love about out-of-body experiences is, like I was saying before, we are all connected somehow, and this is a way that we can kind of utilize that, right? A way that we can kind of utilize that great connection within us to be able to travel beyond the physical limits of our bodies.
Oh yeah, that's true. And when a soul actually travels out of body, you do immediately connect into that consciousness of one that you're speaking about, and you do have the ability to travel to see people, people either living or deceased or, in other realms. So, In the out-of-body experiences, things occur through thought. And so when you're in an out-of-body experience, if you have the thought of someone that you're concerned about or just want to see, you will almost instantaneously be there, because that's the nature of how things work in the spiritual world.
It's a matter of things kind of happening separately, but yet all at once, right? That these separations between events and between days and between moments. It's all something that's really just a man-made construct, really more than anything, right? Because we need to find a way to measure time, but in actuality, everything's kind of instantaneous.
Well, there's some truth to that, and there's some that's a little bit more finessed, so to speak, in the sense that I wouldn't say humanity has really created it this way. It's really more the mechanics of existence that has set this in motion. So, we have existences that reside within the worlds of time, and we have existences that reside in the worlds of timelessness. And in the worlds of timelessness, you are existing outside of these individual moments that are categorized by time, and everything is simultaneous. But when you are within the context of time and in the worlds of time, time does have meaning, and it does have a construct, and it does serve a purpose. So it's when you fully look at the whole process, the mechanics of how the out-of-body experiences work, as well as what do they tell us about how the spiritual world and how the realms beyond this world actually operate, that becomes what's really important. What we find is that every one of these modes of existence has a very express purpose, and they're all very important. So that is what we want to focus on in the out-of-body travel state. So while we're here in the physical body, the time construct does serve a purpose. However, you're absolutely correct, because we are all connected, and those of us who have that spiritual experience or whatever can feel that even in the physical realm, the connectedness of all consciousness. However, it becomes much more magnified in the out-of-body experience.
I do think, though, that when those strands that do connect us are taken advantage of,
mm-hmm.
you kind of, and you probably can vouch for this for having these experiences, but it's like one of those things that once you've opened that door, it's open. And you have to be prepared to realize that there's going to be more than... So if I say to you, I want to be able to leave my body and be able to go and visit, the Great Pyramids, because I'm never going to get to see them in my physical self, in my physical form, just because of time and cost and all of that, that I want to go and travel to the Great Pyramids. It's not that simple, though. Once you're able to do that, aren't you kind of opening yourself up for myriad other experiences, both wanted and unwanted?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the reason I think it's so important that people understand that the out-of-body experience is something that needs to be cultivated. It's a path that requires a great deal of discipline and study, and awareness, but those kinds of awarenesses that you will need are things that will be cultivated through the experiences themselves. So you have to be very willing to be directed by your guardian angels, by the spirit world, in the sense of having the proper protection. A lot of times, too, people don't realize just how vast the out-of-body experience can truly go. And I think this is really important, because the out-of-body experience is often just thought of as like one of the many paranormal gifts, but it really isn't just that. It really is a gateway. It's the key to understanding and unraveling the purpose of our existence here in this realm. And so when you talk about, like, okay, I want to go to the Great Pyramids, which of course we all do, and I've had the pleasure in the mystical experiences, ironically, as you probably would surmise, the Great Pyramids have a great deal to do with initiation and rites of passage. So I experienced those during a period of time when my out-of-body experiences were taking me into deep initiation. But when we talk about wanting to go like to the Great Pyramids or wanting to go to any really neat location on the earth, we forget that there are so many locations within the spheres of existence that we don't even know about. So what happens that we learn very quickly if we start having out-of-body experiences and we're surrendering to the process and we are allowing it to be cultivated within us and with the proper guidance from the proper spiritual realm, is that you're going to want to surrender that experience more to God, so to speak, because if you try to control it yourself, then you are going to limit yourself based on what you already know, which is always infinitesimally smaller than what God would want you to know or what God might have to show you. And so there is a lot of wisdom to having the surrender in the travel, because the places that you will travel to are going to expand greatly. You know, there's an infinite number of realms in the heavenly and in the purgatorial and in the hellish spheres. And the third and fourth realm, the earth where we live, is within those purgatorial spheres. And so we have so much that we don't know exists and we can only surmise. We think of the out-of-body experience as being something much more limited than it really can be if the journey is taken properly.
So when we are having these out-of-body experiences, is it our soul that is leaving the physical shell?
Yes. It is your soul, but in terms of, exactly what part of that matter, we don't know exactly how much of that, because there are different aspects of consciousness and soul that you're going to experience in the out-of-body travel states, infinitesimal variables of the vibration that will occur. We don't exist really as the one-dimensional beings that we perceive ourselves to be when we're in our physical bodies. We really have a multitude of existences, and they're all on a different level of vibration. So these levels are not always exactly the same, when one person might experience it or when another might experience it. But yes, in essence, yes, your spirit is leaving the physical shell, and by so doing, it immediately is transforming then your consciousness from the physical shell to a spiritual vibration, which is a higher vibration than what you experience in your physical waking life. And so you're immediately going to be perceiving much more than what you're accustomed to. You're also going to be feeling a great deal of vibration, a lot of times hearing a lot of really loud jet engine noises, and this is because you're getting accustomed to the higher vibration of the spirit. Most of the time, people will then also be plugged into what I call the mind of God, and this is where people all of a sudden, instantaneously understand the mysteries of the universe. Everything makes sense. All the things that didn't make sense before, all of a sudden they know it. It's a very profound, very peaceful, very loving, this beautiful love that people talk about. That's usually something that people will touch into. Now, when people are having, their first out-of-body experiences, that can vary a little bit just because some people can find the experience, especially if they weren't seeking it, to be especially jarring, and so they might, experience a great deal of fear. And so some people will have a variation on how they feel the first time or the first few times that this might happen, but that's normal, and that's not to be considered any obstacle to further travel. The reality is that it is a very different state, and people react very differently to it when they're first experiencing it.
Well, you mentioned that, other people are doing this at the same time. Is it possible to run into them while you're doing it? That while you are in this out-of-body state, you will encounter others who are in that similar state?
Oh, yeah, that's very, very common. What you'll find, although there are people who have the ability to intentionally meet one another when they're in the out-of-body travel state, that's less common than the fact that most human beings during their sleep cycle undergo some form of out-of-body experience. But most humans are not aware of it. It's very subconscious or unconscious. So, yeah, you will meet a lot of people you know and people you don't know, who may be traveling what I call subconscious astral. And ironically, in this traveling state of the subconscious astral, a lot of things happen there. There's a reason why people are having out-of-body experiences, in their sleep and not being aware of them. It's not because there's no purpose to them. There's a great deal of purpose to them. So what happens in our subconscious sleeping states is a great deal of instruction. A lot of times what you'll see, like with the angels, they will be going from bed to bed, so to speak, and making energetic adjustments in each individual soul based on what their own unique requirements and needs are at that moment in time, because we go through this through our whole lives. There's also things that go on, classes. There's people who get together, souls who get together to discuss specific issues that they might be facing in their lives. They're like support groups in the spiritual realms. There are also places that people go to learn more about astral flight and how to access the out-of-body experiences to a more conscious degree, and also to a profound degree in the sense of trying to utilize it for the purpose of enlightenment and the evolution of the soul. And what you'll find is when somebody first starts having these experiences, they may just be having a basic, popping out of the body, going around the room, traveling around the astral plane, but what will happen over time is that you're going to start traveling through tunnels and corridors. You're going to be traveling into the higher and the lower spheres and the middle spheres, of which we're part of in the purgatorial realms. And you're going to be seeing things of really magnificent nature. As St. Paul said, eye has not seen nor ear heard, and that is very true. But we also have this continual, what I call creation giving back to creation, which is something that is actually called upon by each of us when we are actually receiving this gift of out-of-body experiences, because the experiences are training us and teaching us and taking us forward in the purification journey of the soul, which is essentially the purpose of our existence here in these mortal realms. And in order for us to receive of it, we have to take a vow to give back to creation that which creation gives to us. And therefore, like for instance in my case, I have been called in to work with a lot of souls in various purgatorial realms as well as hell realms to assist them in their movement forward. And, of course, also with souls who are still incarnate, you work with them on subconscious levels while they're sleeping. You also will do a lot of work with helping lost souls and wandering spirits to cross over, as well as helping with the afterlife journey that souls will make when they are just crossing over. And that afterlife journey is very different for each individual soul, because literally for every soul configuration, there's a myriad of worlds to accommodate the lessons that that soul configuration will require. So what you find in the out-of-body experience is that you are really encountering God in the highest sense in reaching towards the evolution of the soul. And the evolution of the soul comes down to when you are in a mortal realm like we are here, which is a purgatorial realm, which means that we are working towards the purification of those elements within our own souls that still remain in darkness or delusion or self-deceit or deceit in any way, to bring those elements towards the light, towards life, towards that which is good and that which is true. And so all of these things come together because we're creating an energetic thrust that is going to steer the soul towards the direction of the highest attainment, and this direction wherein the soul will be able to have the potentiality to achieve its highest good. And of course, unfortunately, in the mortal realms, we also have a very common problem, which is that many of us are very resistant to that type of direction, and we turn it down, and we end up getting stuck here. We get stuck kind of standing still. And that's a really important factor in understanding what the purpose of out-of-body experiences are, because the intention of them is the ascension of the soul to its highest state, its highest good, its highest attainment. But we often don't realize that its actual purpose is so lofty. We think of it as a paranormal gift, but it's really so much more. It really holds the key here, as to what is it that we need to accomplish in order to move forward from this realm and go to the next level spiritually and not have to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And the irony is we don't realize how easily we can actually energize that sort of thrust in our individual lives. And a lot of times, because we don't realize that, we do stand still. So it's a very important point, because we want to point out to everybody that this particular path of acceleration is truly available to anyone who truly and with sincerity really reaches for it. Not necessarily, out-of-body experiences per se, but people who reach for it are going to find this path in one way or another. It's going to be revealed to them, because that's the mechanics of this realm. That's the purpose of the existence of this realm and why we are embodied here.
Well, we're going to take a break coming up here in about a minute, so I don't want to ask you a loaded question that will take a while to answer, but on the other side of the break, I want to talk more about, you had mentioned both lost souls and wandering spirits, and I'd like to discuss the differences between those and some of your experiences with both of those. And we'll talk more about the difference between when a soul is wandering and when a soul is haunting. We'll also talk more about the difference between a haunting and a poltergeist as well. So there's a lot of things to unpack here. And of course, this comes from your book, Ghosts and Lost Souls, the Mystic Knowledge series. And we'll talk about some of the other books in the Mystic Knowledge series as the night goes on as well. And if you would like to check out Marilynn's website, you can do so. It's linked up right on midnightinthedesert.com. You can go right there, and that will take you to her site, which is outofbodytravel.org. So it's a .org. It's an organization. That means it's basically the AAA of out-of-body experiences, right?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Now, if I'm out there astral projecting and traveling out of my body and I break down, do I get towed back home, or am I only towed to the nearest service center?
Well, usually you're towed back home when it's an out-of-body breakdown.
All right, that's good. So I don't even need to buy the Gold Plus membership. That's perfect.
Not generally, no.
All right. So we're going to take a break. We'll come back with more with our guest Marilynn Hughes, and really we'll get into some very, very deep stuff. So that's what's so great about Midnight in the Desert is we can really get into the deep, deep subjects because we know that you, the audience, well, you can handle it, and you'll be handling a lot more coming up after the break here on Midnight in the Desert. Welcome back to Midnight in the Desert. Tim Weisburg filling in for Dave Schrader, and we are talking with Marilynn Hughes. We're talking about Ghosts and Lost Souls, the Mystic Knowledge series, and we'll be talking about a bunch of different topics with Marilynn as the night goes on, and then we'll be joined later on in the program by Louis Proud. But in the first segment, Marilynn, you had mentioned both that when you're out of body and you're traveling in that manner, that you can run into both lost souls and wandering spirits, and it sounds like there's a difference between the two, and I'm wondering if you can explain that for us.
Sure, yeah. Lost souls are very often your typical type ghosts. There's a very, very wide range in when you're dealing with hauntings. So, your typical ghosts that are not the dangerous type, the non-benevolent, these are more benevolent, but they're lost. A lot of times they're lost because of several reasons. They're usually quite common what the reasons are. Usually it's associated with a sudden, unexpected death, sometimes a really tragic or, a horrible accident, not just any kind of horrible accident, something terrible, very fast, that takes the soul by surprise. One minute they're embodied, and the next minute they're deceased, and so they become lost because, in effect, oftentimes they don't realize they've died. So that's one of the key elements in a lost soul is a lot of times they don't realize they've died. Another element in a lost soul is that they are generally due to various factors, one being the traumatic nature of their death, the suddenness of their death, but also sometimes the nature of whatever they may have believed during their life. A lot of times, if someone has no spiritual beliefs at all, they're more likely to become a lost soul because they don't expect anything to exist after they cross over from this realm, so they're a lot more confused by that when that happens and they are suddenly conscious in another realm. So lost souls carry those characteristics, and those characteristics combined will create a condition in the afterlife state where their vibration will not automatically rise upon their crossing. So what happens when their vibration does not automatically rise is that their third sight vision does not accelerate, which means they're unable to respond to guardian angels or assistance from the other side. And as a result of that, they're unable to, in part because they cannot see them, because their vibration hasn't risen high enough for them to be able to see them in the higher, finer frequency where they reside. So a lost soul will often be very confused, very attached to the moment of their death, very, very emotionally charged, a lot of times related to the nature of their death. A lot of times they will really have trouble with the concept that they are in existence and yet they have died, and that would be more in relation to beliefs they might have held. But a lost soul has a general problem, which is very solvable, which is that they have not risen to the vibrational level to really receive the help that they need to cross over fully. So a lot of hauntings that you'll see are related to such situations. You will also see situations like this where lost souls might have a tendency to hold on and want to stay earthbound just because it's more comfortable to them. They're afraid of what they might find. They're not comfortable moving forward. So you're going to have just a general condition, and that's why they might stay in a place for a very long period of time. Another interesting element in these situations with souls who are on the other side, who are still in need of assistance crossing over after, long after they've crossed officially, because, that's different than someone who crosses over and then they go through what would be considered the more normal process of the afterlife procedures. This is when someone gets lost. But what happens is that there can be a time compartmentalization type syndrome in the fact that they lose track of how much time might be passing. So literally, 100 years can pass to them and it can seem like 5 minutes. And so this is also one of the things that contributes to some of these situations where a soul might be lost for what appears to be a very long time. But going back to what you had said, Tim, about when you're in timelessness, things change a bit. So it may not actually be as long sequentially for that soul as it appears to us here in the physical embodiment. Wandering spirits, on the other hand, are generally souls who have crossed over, and for whatever reason or another, they've gone through some of the processes of crossing over that are considered typical, and they've been given some level of understanding of some of the things that they have to atone for. So a lot of times wandering spirits, ironically, are purgatorial spirits. They have been given the directive to wander the earth doing certain things that maybe they neglected to do during their life, and they have to do this for a certain period of time as a certain atonement, and also for them to become more compassionate and generate some of the things that they didn't generate during their lives. And so these souls are not lost, but they can also come across to people as ghosts when, in fact, they're serving an entirely different function. Now, when you're dealing with a lost soul, the primary objective for an out-of-body traveler who has been called to aid those who are lost is to work towards bringing the soul's vibration up. Because once you're able to bring that soul's vibration up enough that they begin to have that spiritual vision and are able to see their own guardian angels, then you're going to hand them over to their guardian angels, and they're going to be good from there. The guardian angels take it from there, so to speak. And so what do you do? Well, when you have a soul who's lost and you need to raise their vibration, there are certain things that are done energetically that come through the hands that are given to you as, energetic gifts as you go through the different rituals and rites of passage in the out-of-body states. And these are things that you actually, spiritually offer to that soul. But a great deal of the process is literally communication with them, where you are speaking to them about the fact that I'm not sure if you're aware that you have crossed over and that you have died. And then you kind of give them a moment to take that in. And then you're, okay, so this is what has happened here. So you're on the other side here, and you're kind of in this space here, and what we really need to see happen is for you to be able to receive the assistance of your guardian angels. And then you're going to talk about the specific scenario. And there are so many thousands of scenarios. Some people have things that they believe that are blocking them. I'll give you an example. One. This is just one of so many different examples. But years ago, I had a lost soul who had actually been executed for a crime he hadn't committed. But he had gone through so much in terms of being held accountable for this crime that he hadn't committed that when he crossed over, he fully believed that he would be condemned to hell for that, even though he hadn't done it. And so I had to talk with him about how, even though he had gone through all of this, that God knew the truth and that that was not going to be the case. And ironically, because he was so attached to this idea that he was going to be condemned to hell for this, he was unable to rise high enough to actually see that, the light and the guardians that were coming in to try to take him higher, because ironically he was a soul who had undergone a great deal of persecution and had actually garnered a lot of favor, within the heavenly spheres for his patient acceptance of what had happened to him. But as I spoke to him, I remember his shock and he was just so blown away by the fact that God was sending help to him and that he was going to be released from this condition and this state. And then as he starts opening up to this, you start seeing his vibration come up. He becomes higher, finer, lighter. And then all of a sudden what will happen with any lost soul is at some point you're talking to them, you're offering them energy, and all of a sudden they'll say, oh, I see them, there they are, and you're like, okay, go with them, you're good, and that's their guardian angels, and then they will be taken to cross over fully. But it's different with every person, because, there are people who are holding on to concerns about someone who may still be living. There are people who are crossing over with serious baggage about things they may have done, violent acts they may have committed in the moment of their death. Things so there's a lot of different scenarios. With the wandering spirits, they've already kind of gone through some of this post-life review stuff, and they're already starting on their process. But one of the common things about both lost souls and wandering spirits that is real important for all people to understand, and I think this is a common misunderstanding that people have about the spirit world, when you cross over, you don't just automatically become enlightened. So, when people are seeking to speak to the dead, so to speak, what they're doing is they're reaching out most primarily to lost souls and to wandering spirits, because the spirits of a higher order are not going to respond to that sort of thing. And we can talk more in a bit here about what kinds of things the spirits of a higher order will respond to. But what happens to these situations is people will then reach out to these spirits and not recognize that they're just as confused as they were when they were alive, and they don't have anything to share with you that is going to help you in your own spiritual journey. And in fact, sometimes wandering spirits have been known to, almost like play practical jokes. It's almost like funny to them, because these are spirits who are still in the process of purification. And so, they can be trickster spirits. They can do things that are completely not okay. But definitively, they have nothing to offer anybody in regards to spiritual wisdom or any guidance about their lives. And so that's an important thing in terms of calling up people and realizing that, they don't have anything to tell you that they would have been able, that they couldn't have told you when they were still alive. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, I
it
do.
Hasn't changed. You know what I'm saying?
So
Go ahead.
then,
Sorry.
if you're able to help these lost souls and help them with trying to raise up their vibrations, if I can speak correctly, and you're trying to help them get to that level, how does that work? Because you're just you outside of your physical body when you're encountering them. Is there a way?
Right, and this is a very good question. The reason why that people are pulled in for this service who are embodied in the physical is because of that vibrational chasm. So because of the fact that I am embodied in a physical body. When I leave my body, my vibration is something that they can see. Whereas, a higher angel is going to be so high and fine, it's way above their ability to discern. So we become like, we become the middleman, so to speak. We're providing a bridge for them to get from here to there. And so people who are embodied, who experience out-of-body experiences, and who are called to serve with lost souls, and, we're all called differently, so not everyone who has out-of-body experiences is called to do that. So, don't think that that you're going to just automatically have to do that. It's just whether or not that's your particular thing, but that's why. It's because they are able to see us, they're able to communicate with us, because we still have enough of our vibration held down to the physical world, and it makes it possible for them to see us and communicate with us.
So does that idea, that concept of lost souls, does that explain most of the hauntings that we encounter?
Well, unfortunately not. And, this goes into quite a few different areas, but we'll start with, I'll just point out, you have the lost souls and the wandering spirits they do consist of a lot of the hauntings that we do experience. Another element of hauntings is what's called, the energetic residue. So, like, for instance, if you go to a battlefield in Colorado where hundreds of cavalry and Indians died, you're going to experience an energetic residue from that actual event, because energetically high charged events leave residue in the areas that they come from. So people can experience things that are a part of the residue, as well as, there could also be souls remaining who still need some assistance to cross over. But again, then you're taking that to another level, where these kinds of places then need that residue to go through a purification in order to, reclaim that place, for instance. Or like, another example would be, a place where, a lot of people were murdered. You know what I mean? These kinds of places will have highly charged energetic residue. So that is also part of it. But then you go into the next realm of what happens in hauntings, and this is where it gets a lot more complicated and a lot more dangerous, and this is where we get into spiritual warfare, because there is a battle between the principalities and powers of good and evil in this world. That is the nature of the mortal realm, so it is to be expected. But what we have is, various levels of dark spirits to the demonic to pure evil, and so you're dealing with a whole nother realm in terms of, the real understanding of the demonologies, but also, there are, you have this whole realm that involves the demons, but you also have a whole realm that involves various levels of darkness within individual souls. And when you're dealing with these kinds of things, which a lot of hauntings end up going in this direction, because generally that's the sort of thing that's going to stay in a place for a much longer period of time and not be resolved. It's going to be an obstinate situation, an obstinate spiritual situation. And a lot of times when you're dealing with these highly energetically charged places, especially where the highly energetic charge is really atrocious acts of evil or a lot of death, a lot of violence, you're going to find that energetic residue creates a situation where it attracts the demonic, it makes it compatible to the demonic, one of the things that happens with ghosts and spirits on the other side that are not traveling correctly or moving correctly forward through evolution, the evolutionary spheres, is that they will congregate. And so you can literally find these pockets where you may have literally 100 or sometimes hundreds, but usually, little pockets of 100 or 200 souls who are sharing a similar issue. So that on the same point, you would also find the dark and demonic, which would congregate in a certain place. And this is one of the reasons why these hauntings oftentimes will get more and more serious and more dangerous. It's because these things energize themselves, so they're attracting like to like. It's just bringing in more and more of the same. And so, ironically, a lot of the work with souls on the other side, whether they're lost, wandering, or even the dark and the demonic, because a lot of people don't realize, but those are also situations where people who are called in have to go in, and we have to take care of those kinds of situations also. So one of the things that is real important in this whole concept is understanding something called energetic truth. And what that is that when you go into a situation in the mystical, you will see what something might appear to be on the ground, and then what you're going to receive from the energy of God is what the energetic truth is. So, for instance, you're going to immediately be infused with the knowledge of, okay, this is a particular type of demonic spirit, and this is what you're going to do, or this is a particular type of darkness, and this area needs to be cleansed, and this is how you're going to do it. But it is also, this is one of the things about energetic truth that is real important. Sometimes things will appear to be one thing, but are entirely the opposite. So, like, for instance, you can have a haunting, and I've seen cases like this where it really appears to be a totally demonic situation, and you go in and you find out the energetic truth, and it's just a really scared child who may have been killed very violently. And so they respond in a way that really appears to be that of an evil spirit when it's really just a scared little child. But it can also be the opposite, where you think you have a nebulous little spirit, and you go in and you find out this is a really nefarious spirit who is involved in a lot of destructive actions towards the physical realm, which is a violation of eternal law, which therefore calls in the justice of God, and therefore people who are called to this will be asked to go in and rectify that situation. So it can be very varied. It's really quite variable in terms of what you're going to see, but there's a lot of differences, a lot of gradations in terms of levels of, first of all, when you're dealing with the lost and the wandering, gradations of ignorance or just delusion, and then the gradations of darkness, which are, agreed to evils, whereas then when you go into, demonic and evil, pure evil spirits, they just literally enjoy causing harm. And so you have to understand the nature of all of these different ones to understand how to deal with them when you are actually brought into the situation. But it also helps to understand when you're dealing with like a true, demonic spirit or an evil spirit, because you can have evil spirits who are formerly human beings who are just evil spirits now. And then there's demons, which are of a different order of being. But if you're dealing with that, then you are dealing with an energy and an intention that enjoys causing harm. And so it gives you the information you need to properly protect yourself and to understand that you're dealing with something much more serious when you're getting into that realm versus some of these others that can be dealt with without nearly as much effort and without the danger that's involved.
Right. Well, absolutely. And we'll pick up some more of some of this, and we'll also talk about how you can combat some of these negative entities and combat some of these demonic entities. Well, we'll talk more about spiritual warfare coming up in the next hour. But we will take a break now. When we come back on the other side, we'll have more with Marilynn Hughes as we talk about ghosts and lost souls, spiritual warfare, angels and demons, the Mystic Knowledge series with Marilynn Hughes. More Midnight in the Desert in just a few. Welcome back to Midnight in the Desert. Tim Weisburg filling in for Dave Schrader, and we are talking with Marilynn Hughes. She is the author of the Mystic Knowledge series, including Ghosts and Lost Souls, as well as Spiritual Warfare, Angels and Demons. And I want to take a step back to just something that you had said in the last hour, Marilynn, and that would be the idea that you can help some of these lost souls to pass on, but that not all of them want that help. What do you do in that situation where you're dealing with an entity that the current occupant of a home wants removed, but yet the spirit who may be a former occupant of that home does not want to leave?
It can be very tricky because it truly becomes a battle between the will of God and the will of a soul who's kind of like choosing to be a little bit apostate, so to speak. And it can become like a drawn-out battle, is what I would say, where it's not so simple, doesn't happen in one night. It happens over a period of time. I remember a particular soul that I had dealt with years ago who was haunting a home. And ironically, in this case, this was an excellent example of energetic truth here. This was an older woman. But before we knew who she was, her behavior in the home, made you think it was possible you were dealing with a demonic spirit. She was messing around with two young children in the home, scaring them and doing a lot of things that would be considered a violation of eternal law. And so I was surprised when I found out that it was an older woman. But what I had found, it was a very old home. And she had lived in this home in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And what she had done was just kind of recycled herself to this one moment in time that she was very attached to in that lifetime. She was in love with a young man, and they had some type of ball in the front room of this house when she was probably in her mid-20s. And in her mind, he was the love of her life, but he married someone else. And she was heartbroken, and she never got over it. And literally, when she crossed over as an older woman, just stayed embroiled in this one moment where she had this moment of, bliss and this moment of love. And it was something that she held on to, but she became so obstinate in it that she was literally violating eternal law. She was scaring these young children. She was extremely not cooperative. And so this was a battle that went on for quite some time. But in this particular case, I was continually brought back in until her soul was subdued. And there was a lot of pretty heavy-handed communication, because she had to be made aware of what she was doing and what it was, the reality of what that meant to God. And that, one of the things that happens in these scenarios is people don't realize, there are laws that come from our Supreme Creator, and, we don't want to violate them, And so some of this is, making them aware of what they have chosen to be completely unaware of, which is part of the reason they've stayed in this state. Part of the reason, going back to what we talked about, again, about standing still. This is a perfect example of a case of really standing still, literally holding on to one moment and not being able to move forward. But it was a true battle, and in the end we were able to extricate her, and, that house was cleared and there were no more problems. And she crossed over, and it was a really beautiful moment when she did. This was not an evil spirit, but she was violating eternal law, so she was really riding a fine line in terms of getting herself in more trouble with her soul. And, what happens, and, when I say that, I want to kind of make it clear what that means. We can do things as souls and as human beings that either move us towards life or towards death. Things that move us towards light, towards darkness, towards good, towards evil, towards God, towards not God. And so when I say, getting yourself in a little more trouble, that means like pushing yourself backwards. And who wants to go backwards? We want to try to go forwards rather than pushing ourselves backwards. And a lot of times, when you deal with just the reality of lifetimes on Earth, what people often don't think about enough is, we come in with a certain amount of debt that we want to make up for, things that we need to learn, things we need to do, things we need to change within ourselves and within around us or whatever. And a lot of times, if we choose to stand still, not only do we not rectify any of that, but we can add more debt to it. And so we can be pushing ourselves even more backwards rather than forwards. And so that's a real important thing for us to all look at in terms of our own lives, because in the end, none of us wants to end up in this particular state. And we also want to learn what it is that brings souls to this state so that we can understand how it can be rectified. One of the misunderstandings we have about ghosts and lost souls is that we look at it as kind of like an anomaly. It's interesting and stuff like this, but we don't realize, these are people who died, and they're people who really need some help. And so we can get lost in, the fact that a lot of times it's scary and it can be terrifying, depending on the circumstance people are dealing with. But in a lot of cases, a lot can be remedied just by recognizing, okay, I've got a person here who needs a little bit of help. And if if you're not equipped yourself to handle it, call in someone who is, someone who's able to help that soul. Because we're going to then move things forward rather than just, wow, this is interesting. These people are hanging around, you know what I mean? But yeah. Because we don't want that to happen to them, you know what I mean?
No, but also, I mean, when you're talking about the idea of having some, at least when you're in that state of being, you should have at least some higher level of consciousness. You may not have learned everything that you're supposed to learn yet, but you're supposed to be able to see the forest for the trees at that point. You're supposed to be able to at least gain, you might not gain all the knowledge that we will eventually acquire as we go through this process, but you should at least be able to jump back into seeing the world that you were formerly a part of, but with at least a little bit of added knowledge. Just the fact of knowing that there's something beyond this, I would think would make you a better lost soul if you were going to be one, if you get what I mean. Like, if you get to that point, you would think just knowing that you're no longer alive, but you're still conscious and sentient in some way would probably solve a lot of the problems.
Well, ironically, it usually doesn't. And the reason for that, again, going back to the vibration, for a soul to be in that state in the first place means that there's not a lot of room there for spiritual development, or hasn't been in that lifetime. And so when you're dealing with the lost souls and things like that, generally there's not that. They're not going to have a higher understanding yet. We have to understand that this is a particular state that has, faced some kind of hiccup, so to speak, where they're not following the more preferred process of crossing over. So they haven't gotten to that benefit yet. However, most people, when they cross over, they do have that benefit. Of course, when you're dealing with dark or evil or demonic things, they don't have that kind of an understanding. They don't think that way. That's why their energy is dark or, of the nature that it is, the dominance that it is. But one thing to keep in mind, though, too, with lost souls, I want to make this clear as well. It's real important. When you're dealing with lost souls and wandering spirits, these are people, many of whom are very good, well-intentioned people who just, and a lot of times they've gone through something really horrible. And a lot of times as well, when people pick up a lost soul, when they pick up that energy, a lot of times it's so overwhelming because sometimes people even experience just a lot of fear, and of course they experience anxiety and panic and all those things because that's what the soul was feeling at the time of their death, and they're oftentimes trying to share that with somebody. They want somebody to understand what they've been through. And so these are people that we want to love. Ironically, the biggest factor in helping any soul in their crossing journey, but of course even more so with lost souls and wandering spirits, is love. And so we want to love them and recognize that they're just like us. And this is where creation gives back to creation. We want to give back to creation because this is how we all are afforded the opportunity to evolve, by the fact that guardian angels come and assist us, and then we are required to assist people who are in a situation that maybe we were in at a different time in our own development. So we want to have that compassion and that love for all of those beings. You do, however, have to have a little bit of a different kind of take when you're dealing with dark and demonic, because when you're dealing with the dark and the demonic, you have to stand. And if you don't stand, you have to remember these are real battles between principalities and powers, and the very nature of that tells you that you can lose, and you don't want to go in there with any kind of misconceptions, because you can really, they're very, very intensive battles, and people can get, you can get physically harmed, you can get sick, things can happen, and you can lose. And so when you're dealing with the dark and the demonic, you're going to have a very different approach. But when you're dealing with ghosts, lost souls, things of this nature, you want to remember that love and compassion is a huge part of being able to help them. Another thing about the wandering spirits is if you're ever in a situation where the wandering spirits come up and talk to you, which they do to me once in a while, they will usually ask you to pray for them. They'll say, this is what I've been told I need to do this, and this is why, and I'd like to ask you to please pray for me. And what happens, people don't understand how powerful our prayers are for those who have crossed over. We're offering to them not only, again, creation, giving back to creation, but it's compassion, it's love, it's energy for the journey. Prayer is energy for the journey. We're giving them an impetus to help them in this purification process. So a lot of times, if you're coming upon a situation, you feel like you've either picked up a wandering spirit or a lost soul, even if you don't know which one it is, if you start to pray for them, you are going to oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes, you're going to see that that's going to start a process that's very beneficial and helpful to those souls, and they appreciate it so much, and it also helps us because that's what they're trying to get through to us so much of the time is we need your help. We need you to know we're here and that we need assistance. And so just starting with prayer is almost a perfect way to go, because it's going to be helpful no matter what it turns out to be. You know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean. And that's when you're talking about this idea of these negative entities, these demonic beings kind of going after you. You talked about this a little bit, but let's get a little more in depth in it. What is the goal for them? Because I always hear these stories about demonic possession, demonic takeover from different paranormal groups that say, "Oh no, I've seen it. I've had to actually be there for an exorcism and all that." Is that what the ultimate goal is of the spiritual warfare? Is to take on the human form, or is there something much deeper and more important than that? Because I'd have to think, possessing a human being is probably fun. It's like having it's like having a Jeep. It's probably fun to drive now and then when the situation is all right, but I wouldn't want to be in one every day.
Exactly. Very good point. I don't know that I can speak for, what the actual purpose of possession itself is. I would probably direct that to an actual exorcist.
Sure.
But what I would definitely say is, with all of these spiritual warfares, and I'm sure that possession falls into some line here, but there's, a more theological understanding that I think an exorcist would answer better. In what I have seen in my mystical experiences, the whole goal of these spiritual warfares is corruption. And so what you have is the spirits of the dark and of the evil want to continue to corrupt, because that is their very nature. So what they want to do is either lead other souls into sin or into other bad acts. Sometimes they will actually, seek to cause harm, physical harm. We see that's usually in the case of, some of the worst hauntings. But the spiritual warfare applies to all of us, because this happens with every single person. You can see this even if you pay close attention. You can see how the goal of all of it is corruption. It's to corrupt the good into evil. And so it's going to try to twist the way you think. It's going to try to twist and deceive the way that you process information, so that you can become deceived and deluded in a variety of ways in your life, whether it's to turn you against those you love, whether it's to turn you down another path that is not your highest path, whether it's just simple things like to lead you to lie or lead you to small acts of not necessarily good, and then try to lead you into further and further and further acts where they escalate. So that really is the goal in all of these situations. It's simply corruption. Whereas, and this can be more understandable when you understand, well, what is the goal of the higher angels? Their goal is the purification of the soul. And the goal of the dark and demonic is the corruption of the soul, is to destroy it. And, God's angels, their purpose is to enliven, to energize, to lighten, to bring higher, whereas the goal of darkness will always be to bring lower, to bring you lower, to corrupt, to deceive, and to lie. And it's such an important point, Tim, because this really is the crux of the earthly battle that we face every day. This is the very, very thing that we have been brought here and embodied here to fight the battle for. And obviously the goal would be that we would be moving forward towards goodness and light and towards love and wisdom. But all too often, through many, many deceptions of the world, we are led into paths that actually turn our soul backwards. And so it's really important for all of us, because not only does this apply to, the souls in the afterlife, the souls who are already crossed over, this applies to us who are still living here on Earth, in that we're in the same battle. We're just on a different battlefield. We're still embodied, but it's really not a different battle. One of the things that happens when you do cross over to the afterlife is that sometimes, depending on the vibration that each soul carries, if the soul has a high enough vibration, those subtleties are going to become more visible to us. Now, that ironically is one of the benefits of cultivating meaningful out-of-body experiences, because what happens in the meaningful out-of-body experiences is that we are taught and educated over long periods of time. It's not a short process, because there's a lot for us to learn. But we are educated over these long periods of time about the energetic truth about all the things around us in our world. So we see our own delusions about, reality around us, but also we're shown the energetic truth about ourselves. So we're shown in a myriad of ways over a long period of time our own failures, our own, things that we need to improve upon. And we become much more focused if we are paying enough attention to the direct approach to actually moving forward. In the human experience, people very often get distracted with a lot of things that actually will have no benefit to their eternal destiny, whereas a lot of people, once they start experiencing out-of-body experiences and they meaningfully pursue it on a path towards God, they will find that these things are revealed to them. So, what happens is our conscience becomes more well-formed because we are being taught from above what is good and what is true versus what is not so much. We are given the opportunity to actually witness and see why something is dark by the nature of the energy itself. We see it, and so we see, okay, that is an action that leads to death, and death meaning the death of the spirit. And so when you're looking at our journey in this life going forward, we are either moving towards life or towards death. And life is all that is good and true and that which, of God. And death is the way that extinguishes the spirit, which is the path of darkness, the path of delusion and deceit, self-deceit, and of course evil takes it down another even harder, longer road. So all these things are so important, not just in our understanding of what happens with the souls of those who have crossed over who are struggling, but it's absolutely relevant to the souls of us who are still embodied, who are still struggling here, just on a different battlefield. And by taking the time to understand these things, we are making it more possible that, we ourselves and more people, as they become more aware of these elements of the energetic interchange between what's happening in the physical domain versus the spiritual, that we will be able to create an opportunity where maybe some souls will pursue a spiritual path that will prevent them from falling into being in a state of being lost in the afterlife or even in a wandering state. And of course, God forbid, going down a darker path or even following into the demonic, which is really, really, really intense and very serious. and unfortunately, not as uncommon as a lot of us would like to believe. You know, we have a lot of sisters and brothers who are traveling through the purgatories and the lower realms, the hell realms, and it's because of things that they're holding on to that contain darkness or elements of darkness, or, you know, habitual vices that people hold on to. And these can really thrust our souls into places we don't really want to have to go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where, you know, the pleasures of life that you enjoy now that you know are bad for you are probably also just as bad for you when you're not in your physical form anymore as well. But we're going to take a break right now. When we come back on the other side, we'll discuss more about ghosts, lost souls, spiritual warfare, more about angels and demons with our guest, Marilynn Hughes. And I want to talk a little bit, too, about the role of us as people who are living in physical form and living on this earth, but who have the ability to learn how to travel out of body and what role we can play in this great spiritual warfare. So more with Marilynn Hughes coming up on Midnight in the Desert in just a few moments. Welcome back to Midnight in the Desert. Tim Weisburg filling in for Dave Schrader. And we are talking with Marilynn Hughes. We're talking about, well, two of her books, Spiritual Warfare, Angels and Demons, as well as Ghosts and Lost Souls. They are both part of the Mystic Knowledge series. And you can find out more about those by going to Marilynn's website, which is outofbodytravel.org, and it's also linked up at midnightinthedesert.com as well. And I have to ask you, Marilynn, with these two books being part of a series, is this something that will explore a variety of these topics? In addition to, you know, what we're talking about tonight, there'll be some other things that people can learn through the Mystic Knowledge series?
Oh, yeah. The Mystic Knowledge series is a 14-volume series of books, and it covers, you know, the ghosts and lost souls and the spiritual warfare, angels and demons, but it also covers reincarnation and karma. There's a volume on, let's see, so it's hard to remember them right off the top of your head, but they cover a whole variety of things. There's a volume on extraterrestrials. There's a volume on ascension. It's going to go into just about every one of these subjects that you can imagine. And what I did with the Mystic Knowledge series was I took the mystical experiences I had up until the time that series was written and compiled them into these subject matters so that people could have a real focused study on those particular areas. But there's 14 volumes. You can also get it in the one-volume version, but they're all different subjects, just like those.
And you've written them all already, all 14?
Oh, yeah. Those, they're all there.
Very impressed.
Yeah, there's quite a few. And, yeah, there's a lot of really fun things. You know, there's a book on visions of Jesus and the saints and all kinds of things there. All the subjects you can, you know, come up with.
Sounds very cool.
Initiations into the mysteries. That's one of my favorites. The initiations into the mysteries and the rites of passage, which is, you know, a real special and very unique part of the out-of-body travel experience, is when you go into these really deep mystery type teaching periods, you know.
Kind of reminds me, I was going to say, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the old Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown series, where they gave you the information.
Yeah, very good point, yeah. There is a little bit of a similarity there. I think there's a little bit for everybody and what they're specifically looking for. They're probably going to find one of the volumes is on the subjects, you know. So we tried to really separate it out so people could look for exactly what they're interested in. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, while we have the captive audience, if anybody has a Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown series they're looking to unload, you know, shoot me an email, tim@spookysouthcoast.com. I've been collecting the volumes piecemeal over the years, but I just kind of want to have them for posterity because for a lot of folks, that was kind of their introductory into a lot of these topics. And I love the fact that now we have shows like Midnight in the Desert where people can listen to it, learn about it, and decide on their own to go out and get more in-depth knowledge. But it sounds like when we're talking about spiritual warfare, Marilynn, like there wasn't really a whole lot of preparation for you. It sounds like you were kind of thrown into the fire a little bit by being able to travel out of your body and encountering this stuff.
Well, it probably does come across that way because it's very hard to encapsulate, literally thousands of experiences when you're just trying to talk about it. But in reality, it really was very well planned and very well plotted out. For me, the way it started out with taking a lot of journeys into the lighter realms and seeing a lot of the beautiful stuff and having all the beautiful experiences. There was this one point where I had this experience. I was taken into this black space. I was there with a group of other spirits who the best thing to call them would be like commando spirits. And the Blessed Mother appeared, and she said, it's now time for you to start learning about the other side of this. And I was like, no, please, I really don't want to, I'm really good with just enjoying the good stuff. But it went through really a long period of training where I was being taught, first of all, to understand the nature of evil, to understand the nature of all these variations in different states, and going through a lot of preparation and learning as I went as well, because every experience that you have shows you something that you didn't see before, either about God or about yourself. One of the things that I've always felt that is very humbling about these out-of-body experiences is that I don't think there's any one of these thousands of things that I've experienced with other souls where you don't see yourself in whatever their struggle might be. And so there is a real personal purification that you embark upon as well, because there's a real opportunity to have a lot of deeper self-reflection as you observe how other souls purify and work through issues, and you're like, well, I can see, it might not be exactly what you're doing, but you can see yourself in it. We find that we're much more alike than we are different, you know what I mean, as human beings, and our struggles are similar, so there's a great deal of humility in that and recognizing that. But there is a great deal of preparation, and in fact, I really highly recommend for people that, especially when you're going into the area of spiritual warfare, if you are called to do this, you will be taken into it mystically, and you will be trained mystically. And don't feel like you have to just jump in there and do this, because it is something where you really need to have the Spirit of God behind you, or you can get hurt. The only reason I go into these places is not because I choose to, it's because God tells me when He chooses me to. And by traveling that way, I'm traveling safely because I'm just being an instrument, and I can be utilized by the Spirit of God or the spiritual kingdom, but I don't set out to conquer things that are not for me to conquer. Because if you go into something that is not set up there for you by God, by the Eternal, then you go in there not energized for that battle, and you don't want to do that. So there is a great deal of preparation, and it's, for those who really want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can go through the books at the website. One of the things we have, everything on the site is downloadable for free, but you can also get it, in the regular, paperback and digital and Audible and stuff like that. But you can download it for free, and you can literally read through these books in sequence and really follow the process of how this happens and how it opens up to a particular soul. A lot of my readers have followed a very similar journey, because one of the things that does happen is just by the nature of opening your spirit up and reading about these things, it sets off something within your psyche that makes it more possible for you to experience it yourself. And I've heard from so many readers, and we have many of them who help out with all sorts of things now with the foundation, who are going on very similar journeys. And so this isn't something that is, just unusual, or it's something that is kind of like, it's something intrinsic to the nature of our, of man, our spiritual journey. And once it's accessed, you had mentioned that earlier on, Tim, once it's accessed, the sky's the limit, it's gonna,
right,
the worlds are going to open up.
Yeah, that's the thing, is once that door has been opened, it doesn't close again. And even if you are able to close it, it's certainly not latched and locked. It's going to get thrown open once again. So when you are dealing with this, just kind of walk me through the visual here. You're having your out of body experience. You've achieved an out of body experience. What is it that you see going on that leads you to know about this spiritual warfare? Is there outright battles being fought right in front of your face of the two sides going after each other?
What happens is you are taken to the location of the battle that is about to be undergone. So I'll just choose an experience and shoot from one, because there's so many. But like for instance, in a particular spiritual warfare, wherein an evil spirit, a truly demonic creature, was totally dominating a dwelling, someone's home. I was taken into that home, and this creature was really large. He was very reptilian. They often have, some of this, they're very reptilian. And I know that people can confuse that with the reptilian, with the extraterrestrials. It's different, but I understand why there's a confusion there. but that's a whole other subject. But the reptilian with the wing type things, and this particular demon was very, very strong, very, very large, and he had this big boiling cauldron in front of him. Now, one of the things that's always going to happen in a spiritual warfare is you're going to you just are taken there. So I'm there, and one of the things that often always happens too is that as you go through the training to do spiritual warfare, you are trained to utilize these balls of light that will come from your hands. Sometimes they're like a white light, and oftentimes they're bluish. And recently I heard from another traveler that she was very surprised that hers turned green, and that there was a particular purpose for that, because these different colors have different energies. But in most of my experiences, it's white or a blue color. And what's going to happen is a dismantling. When you're dealing with a demonic force, they're given an option. So you're basically having a face down with the demon. The fact that you've been called in, you already know that God has determined that their dominion over this dwelling must end. So therefore, it's you either leave of your own accord or you will be dismantled. And what dismantled, in essence, indicates is that you're going to toss one of those or more of those light balls at them if they don't cooperate with the will of God. And they literally will disintegrate into thousands of pieces. And then those thousands of pieces will be taken down this funnel into the abyss. And that's done if the demon will not cooperate and do as they're supposed to do. So many times during these battles, there's going to be a lot of prayer. So there's ironically, a lot of Catholic prayer. And a lot of people will say, well, that's because you're a Catholic, right? It's like, no, that's part of the reason I became Catholic. I was a convert, so I'm just letting you know that. But a lot of the prayers that are used in these spiritual warfares are general Catholic prayers, having to do like with the Hail Mary. The Our Father is one of the most powerful exorcism prayers in the mystical realms. The Apostles' Creed has a great deal of power. One of the other terms often utilized is the repeating of the terms Christ crucified. Then you're going to call upon the power given to you through Christ, and you give the demon the option. And there's so much going on, it's hard to really even convey in words, because in this particular experience, this demon was really, really powerful, and I was scared. I didn't know if I was going to get through it.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, this one was very powerful, and but in the end, you feel like you're being crushed. You're pushing back, forward. There's an energetic struggle that you're experiencing as it's going on, and generally. It's through the power of the name of Jesus Christ that the battles are won. I did write about that in one of my books because, before I thought it was so interesting how when I hadn't personally had that view myself, how these, first of all, the Catholic prayers and the fact that, when you're dealing with a demonic force, you call in the power of Jesus Christ. In a lot of my books, I have a lot of beautiful experiences with the Buddha, with Krishna, with many of these other prophets, saints, mystics, and sages. But Christ is the one you're going to call in when you're dealing with a demonic force. He just has a particular power, and his station is just what it is, and his station is what is required when you're battling these. And so, when you're dealing with a demonic force, they're going to be dismantled and sent down to a lower abyss. And this is where the mysterious workings of God and the mysterious workings of some of the lower realms, in terms of how energy is then reintegrated and reorganized, and somehow, you know what I mean? Things that I couldn't possibly fully comprehend, but that's what you're going to do, because what happens is if they fall outside of the dominion of what they have been given in terms of what they are allowed to do inside this realm, then they are not allowed to stay, so they have to be expelled. And so that's what happens. And the dismantling occurs because it is an abuse of power, of dark power, and so their essence has built up too much in terms of the blackness, and therefore it has to be taken apart because it's too powerful towards the blackness. It's like a complete. It's just it's a bad configuration that's been made incorrectly, and it has to be taken apart, and the spirit or the soul, or in this case it was a demon, they have to go back and deal with all of the ramifications of those things, in a different space. So there are so many different ways that these things play out, because you'll see in the spiritual warfare times when you're dealing with, specifically like this, with a particular demon, but there are other times when you're dealing with a soul who may have a demon who is operating within them. You may be dealing with a soul who is acting kind of like a demon because they've embraced evil. So there's a lot of different ways that it will actually play out. But there is a lot, the whole thing goes back to constantly trying to manage the energy that moves through the realm according to the will of God. And there's always a balancing going on between these powers of good and evil. And that's really kind of the essence of it. But there's so much more, and like I said, you can read the details. There's a lot of books on the site, and you can read them in great detail. And that's a lot more helpful in the long run to really go in there and see the many different ways it goes down. But you've got the balls of light, where you're utilizing energy and you're taught how to use those, and they're given to you and they're energized. And then you have the prayers, you have the actual energy and the power that is given to you by God to do whatever it is you've been called in to do at that moment. And then you have a situation where they're going to be given an option to either cooperate with Dominion or to be removed from the realm.
So when you're dealing with this, is there a way that you can kind of discern what you're dealing with when you're dealing with these entities, and when you're in your out-of-body experience? You know, you're in your consciousness self, and instead of in your physical self. When you're encountering these, do you know automatically when you approach something, like how it feels, or what kind of a vibration you're picking up on, or can you be fooled? And can your, free from the physical form spirit actually get tangled up and messed up by some of these negative entities that are out there?
Well, that's a really good question as well. And, in terms of how it happens when I'm being brought in, it is infused knowledge. So it's infused into me as to what the situation is. But absolutely, this is important that people know that when you have out-of-body experiences, that there is a great deal of work that needs to be done on discernment. And you can learn a lot about how that discernment occurs by reading the books, but also as you go through the experiences, you will be taught how to do these things and how to discern these things. But you can be deceived, and I think that's a really important message. I do talk about in my books the importance of the questions that you put before any entity that comes to you, even if it looks to be an angel. And that is, you ask them, have you been sent here by God, or are you here of your own accord? And you can also ask the biblical discernment, which is whether, do you believe in Jesus Christ, the Son of God, become man? And what happens in the mystical state is that when you propose those questions to them, if they are not who they say they are, they will either immediately disintegrate, or sometimes they'll just look down and turn around because they weren't sent by God and they were coming to kind of just mess with you. And so there's a lot of really important parts to learning how to discern the spirits when you're in these states. We do have something on the website that I think is really helpful to people. It's called the Course of Study. It's free to anyone who wants to do it, and it has a very, very extended course of study through all sorts of things, the religions of the world, all of the things that you need to know. We have reading material of mystical theology from throughout the world, and one of the things it includes is some material on the discernment of spirits, which I think is really important. And the material we included in the course of study is from the St. Ignatian discernment. It's very, very helpful to people because it not only helps them to learn discernment of spirits when they're having out-of-body experiences, but this particular regimen of discernment helps people really profoundly just in their day-to-day life. So it has a lot of uses all across the board that, people are going to benefit from, whether or not they want to even explore out-of-body experiences or not, or whether or not they ever have that experience. This is going to be really important in your day-to-day life as well, and that's what makes it so valuable.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In just about a minute's time that we have left, what's one thing that you want people to take away from this, from the idea of there being this warfare and being these abilities to be able to travel outside of your body? What should be the one takeaway for folks that are listening tonight?
I want people to recognize that there is a pathway forward, and that it can be taken very easily just by deciding that you're going to choose to move forward and to just step on that spiritual movement. There's a line of energy that moves through the realm, and literally it's like stepping onto the train track, you know what I mean? Saying, I'm just going to get into the movement here. It's not as hard as a lot of people think in terms of just getting into the spiritual path. And then, you can still pursue the out-of-body experiences as well, and many of our readers experience that. But you can get on the path where you're going to be spiritually moving forward very quickly with one step. And so, don't be afraid to be open to it, because it's not nearly as difficult as it might seem to just get started, and then you're going to find yourself very happy with the fact that you'll feel like your life is moving forward again. And that's a good thing.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marilynn, so much for joining us. Again, Marilynn Hughes, her books are Ghosts and Lost Souls and Spiritual Warfare, Angels and Demons, both from the Mystic Knowledge series. And as she mentioned, it's a 12-volume series. You can check it all out on her website, which is outofbodytravel.org, which is also linked up on midnightinthedesert.com as well. So, Marilynn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It was great talking to you, Tim.
Likewise. We'll take a break right now. When we come back on the other side, we'll talk more about some of the mysterious, strange things that are out there in this world with Louis Proud calling us from all the way across the world. More Midnight in the Desert, the international edition, coming your way.